Engedi Ministries presents Living Water. Welcome to Living Water, a Bible study broadcast brought to you by Engedi Ministries. Your speaker today is Dr. David Lawrence. I am your host, Danny Hale. Thank you for taking time to be with us today. Last week we began a 10-part series entitled, Why Should I Believe? This series is designed to demonstrate that our Christian faith is not one without strong evidence to support it. Last week's lesson was the first of a 2-part introduction to the series, and today we will hear the second part of that introduction, Why Should I Believe? David?
Thank you, Danny. If you were with us last week, you know that we started a new series here on the Living Water radio broadcast, Why Should I Believe in God? And we propose to go on with this to why should I believe in Christ? Why should I believe in the Bible? We invite you to use this material. We hope it benefits your friends, your family, maybe you, whoever. We'll just leave that in the hands of God. We'll put the material out there and the Holy Spirit will use it as He sees fit. We hope to the glory of God and to the blessing of people. We started looking at Thomas Aquinas' 5 arguments, reasons to believe in God, taking 2 of them, and we started with the first one last time, that the creation demands a creator, that since we have a universe, we got to have some creation for that universe, some creator standing behind it. But before we came to the idea of creator, we looked at some of the arguments that are given today for why we would not believe in God. And we looked at the idea of the Big Bang Theory, an attempt to explain the existence of matter without God. Here are these gases that exploded. But then the question comes up, where did the gases come from? And where did the energy come from that suddenly acts upon the gases after the gases have been there for an eternity, and all of a sudden at some point in time there's an energy that appears, and we have to say, what's the source of that energy? And we looked at the possibility that it came out of nothing. And really that's illogical, because nothing comes from nothing. Nothing has not the power to produce anything. When we have a situation of nothingness, it will remain a situation of nothingness. It will never change, just nothingness by itself. We looked at the possibility of it happening by chance, and we saw that chance is not anything. Chance is simply the possibility, the philosophical possibility of something existing. So, I hope you would agree with me that we reach a conclusion that the material universe cannot be accounted for as a result of nothing or of chance, but rather that there had to be some self-existent matter, some eternally existing matter from which everything has derived. And we noted that some of the Greek philosophers thought that was the case. But again, the question, if the universe, in whatever form, be it in the form of gases or in the form of some kind of solid material, if the universe has always existed, then what caused this whatever to suddenly become active? Where is the energy? Where is the force coming from? And why, if that force has always been there, did it suddenly at this point move upon the matter? If the matter had been coming together all the time, what caused the original motion? And if it had been coming together all the time, given that it's an eternity, why did it not explode much earlier than when it did? When we begin to think in terms of eternity, then we have a real problem with all of this, you see. Because you really have to say that it doesn't make a lot of sense for matter to have existed eternally. Now, if matter didn't exist eternally, and something has to exist eternally for anything to exist today, the only alternative to that is God. The only answer is God. But maybe we're not ready for that yet, because someone is going to say, now wait a minute, before I believe in God, I have to just say, look, you have an eternity here. You have this long period of time. And given a long period of time, anything and everything can happen, given time. Well, that still doesn't account for the initial existence of anything. But let's go beyond that for a moment, because sometimes people say, well, I just can't possibly account for why we have the matter to begin with. I can't account for why the gases were there, why the energy was there. But then you'll have to say, given the gases and given the energy, for some reason they've just always been there, then everything else we can account for existing as it is today, if you will simply allow us enough time. Because over a long period of time, there can be evolutionary changes that will bring this world into being. And of course, that takes billions of years. And somewhere in this billions of years, this huge amount of time, non-living matter changes into living matter. Now, that's another big jump. I mean, it's a big jump from nothing to something, and it's a big jump from something that is non-living to something that is living. Because what is the ingredient of life? What is the thing that constitutes life and separates it from non-life? And we say, well, we can tell that it's got cells, and these cells have the capacity to divide and to grow and to become something, and then they die. And so this is life, and it is distinctly different from non-life. Well, what caused that change to occur? Again, the answer that is often given is, if there's enough time, it will happen. But then there's still another problem here, and I want us to address this. Not all scientists, by any means, are atheists. Many are. Admittedly so. Many are. But there are many scientists who are believers, who are Christians, and who do not believe that they have sacrificed their intellect or their academic scientific discipline by being believers, who really believe that there is a compatibility between known science and theology. And they are not theistic evolutionists either. There is that category of people who say, I believe both in evolution and in creation, and can in some way harmonize it. I don't want to go into that today. I have some real difficulties with the theistic evolution position. But still, the theistic evolution people believe in God. And we are particularly trying to address the question of, why should I believe that there is a God? And I would like to suggest to you this, that there are those who question that this universe has been around for billions and billions and billions of years, who say that there are some very good scientific evidences out there that suggest that the universe is not as old as we are told, who suggest that perhaps people are reading back into the situation enough time to justify the existence of all these things through a course of natural evolution, and that really we don't have the reason, the scientific basis to say that the universe has existed for an extremely long time. That is a philosophical assumption, a premise upon which we build the evolutionary argument. You just assume this huge amount of time because you know that it takes a huge amount of time for evolution to take place, and you believe that evolution has taken place, therefore, reasoning backwards, there must be this huge amount of time. But someone might say, what kind of evidence could you possibly offer that would say that the universe is young rather than old? Well, let me give you a few examples. And before mentioning some specific ones, I will mention an author if you want to research this matter further. I know this gentleman. He he still is, as far as I know, a professor at Wichita State University in Wichita, Kansas, and I was a member of a Bible science organization when I lived in Wichita a number of years ago. The gentleman's name is Dr. Paul Ackerman. He has published a number of books on this subject. He's well qualified to write on this subject, and I would recommend his books on the young earth, the concept of it's a young world after all. And I think you would find those books very, very interesting. And for those who have concerns in this area, Dr. Ackerman's works would be excellent. But here's some things that he points out, and he's not the only one. There are a number of scientists who point it out. Moon dust. You can say, what? Moon dust? Strange thing to talk about? Yes, moon dust. You see, before the lunar landings a few years ago, scientists had to make sure that they took every possible precaution. Now, they realized that the moon, being a body, had gravitational pull, smaller than the Earth, so not as much gravitational pull as the Earth has. They also realized that throughout the cosmosphere, there is cosmic dust, little particles that are floating around. And these particles are pulled into the gravitational pull of bodies, planetary bodies. And depending upon the size of that body, it will attract so much cosmic dust over a given period of time. Well, the size of the moon is known. Trigonometry can figure that out for us. And so it can be determined mathematically how much cosmic dust would be attracted by the pull of the moon in a given period of time. That being known, that formula worked out, given that the moon is 4 billion years old, then it could be determined how much cosmic dust there would be on the moon. And so the scientists very carefully calculated it to a certain depth of so many feet. And when they built the lunar landing modules, which we've seen them on the tapes from back there when the lunar landings took place, they put these legs on them that were sufficient in height so that the module would, when it sank down through that soft lunar dust, cosmic dust on the surface of the moon, it would sink down so far before it reached the solid surface. And so they were built with these very long legs. You see those. You see them in the pictures. And that's why they have those long legs. They were to sink down through the moon dust. When they arrived on the moon, I understand that they sank down through 1/4 inch approximately of moon dust, not several feet. Now, that was a surprise because they were told to expect so many feet of moon dust. And then they have this fraction of an inch. And when they figured the amount of time necessary for the 1/4 inch to be accumulated, it was about 10,000 years, not 4 billion years, which would suggest that the moon hasn't been around much longer than 10,000, give or take a few thousand. Now, in my mind, the figure 10,000 sticks out as I remember these statistics, but as I recall, it's a give or take so many thousand, but generally around that period of time. Another interesting thing, another one of these clocks, so to speak, is the fluid pressure in oil wells. Now, as I understand from geology, as the living matter is compressed, that eventually becomes petroleum, it builds up a certain amount of pressure over time. Now, if that living matter had lived and was so many billions of years old, there would be a certain amount of pressure. But the amount of pressure that is produced, the fluid pressure in these oil wells, is, I understand from those who've studied this matter, about the amount of pressure that would be produced if that material had been down there for about 10,000 years or so, and not this 4 billion years or millions and millions and millions of years. Another interesting clock, astronomical clock if you please, is the amount of hydrogen in the atmosphere. Now, I'm not a scientist, and we are going to have some studies that Danny Hale will be doing in this series, and he will be talking more about scientific evidences. And he is a scientist. I just know what I've read in this regard, and that is that hydrogen is not expelled and dispelled out into the atmosphere, or beyond the atmosphere, into the cosmosphere. It stays within the atmosphere, within the atmospheric circle around the Earth, these hydrogen molecules. And hydrogen is produced by living things, and it is produced at a certain rate. Now, the amount of hydrogen in the atmosphere, since it is not dispelled, but it remains in the atmosphere, is again about the amount that would be produced in around 10,000 years, not the amount that would have been produced if the Earth had been around for a long, long time. Another factor is the size of the sun. Now, everyone knows that the sun is a ball of fuel, of gas that is burning. And we know that fuel burns up. And so those who study carefully, the astronomers who study very carefully, realize that every day there's a tiny, imperceptible diminishing in the size of the sun. Now, I realize we talk about global warming and we think that can't be true, but there are other factors that are involved in that. But actually, the sun is getting smaller. Now, we don't notice how much it's getting smaller, of course, because it's just such a fraction. Because we think the sun's as big as it ever was. But in reality, it is. And so, if we go backwards and we realize that yesterday it was a little bit bigger than it was today, and the day before that a little bit bigger, and we start taking this back, when we get back to 10,000 years or so, somewhere around in there, the sun would be very big. And the bigger the sun was, of course, the more heat is going to be felt on the earth. And when we get back far enough, somewhere in that same period of time, the surface of the earth would be so hot that no life could exist. In other words, if the sun had been burning for all these billions of years, and if there had been life, man wandering around for millions and millions and millions of years, he would have been burned to a crisp by the size of the sun. These are scientific facts that we're dealing with. Another thing is the rotation of the earth. Even with the Big Bang Theory, the idea is that there was this big explosion that sent the earth spinning, and is spinning like a top. But you know a top spins and it gradually slows down. Well, thus we know that the earth is slowing down. And every day that it revolves around, it's going a little bit slower than the day before. We can't tell it again. It's so imperceptible, such a tiny change. But again, if we start moving backwards and realizing that yesterday it spun a little faster than it did today, and the day before that a little faster, and you go back beyond 10,000. And when you get back much beyond 10,000, the earth would be spinning so fast that the centrifugal force of the earth spinning would have overcome the force of gravity. There's a point, mathematically, where the centrifugal force would be greater than the pull of gravity. And everything on the earth would have spun off into outer space. Another factor is simply population. I heard Paul Harvey mentioning this a number of years ago in one of his radio broadcasts. If the earth was 4 billion years old, if man has been millions and millions of years on the earth, given what we know about man's reproductive patterns, factoring in all the famines and the wars and everything that would depopulate the earth, if man had been around for millions and millions of years, the population would be, I remember Paul Harvey saying, this had been calculated, 1,500 people per square inch throughout the surface of the earth. I don't think 1,500 people would fit in a square inch. So you see, there are some problems with seeing the earth extremely old. It's a very convenient way to explain it in order to justify evolution. However, there are difficulties, and I'm saying this in humility. I'm saying it not to appear arrogant at all, but simply to say there are scientific concerns about an extremely old earth, and there are definite good scientific criteria that suggest that the earth is young. But you see, if the earth is not billions of years old, then the only answer to why there is anything on this earth, why the earth exists and why everything exists on it, the only possible answer could be God. And that, my friends, is the cosmological argument, that the creation demands a creator. I think it's a good argument. I think it's reasonable, but I'll let you be the judge of that. The second argument that Thomas Aquinas gave that I want us to consider is that design demands a designer. We look at this world, it is amazing. And I think science has helped us to just stand in awe of this world, of this universe. Think of how vast it is. Now that we have telescopes, we know that there are billions of stars out there. And then now that we have microscopes, we can see that there are worlds that keep unfolding in the smaller ones. We can see these tiny beings get down into the bacteria world and then into cells and into atoms and electrons and all of this, and the DNA, that tiny genetic code that all of us has, and from that DNA, everything is produced. This is marvelous. What a design. We talk about computers and programming, which is amazing. But think of the body, the human body. Think of a leaf. Think of a snowflake. All these snowflakes, countless number of snowflakes, and no two of them look alike. It's amazing. I heard someone talking the other day on this radio station. I heard a program, and the speaker was talking about, think about when your finger is cut. Immediately when your finger is cut, the body goes into action to repair that cut. And there are about 5 different processes that begin, one after the other, in a certain order, in the repair of blood vessels, in the repair of nerve tissue and of the muscle tissue itself, and finally of the skin, and how it all closes over. It's marvelous. And then you can look a few days later and you can't even tell where it is. If it's a severe cut, there might be a scar there, but most of the time nothing is there. Isn't it amazing? The whole body, as I remember as a student of science when I was in high school and junior high school, the respiratory system, the circulatory system, the nervous system, the skeletal structure, the reproductive system. This is just awesome when we begin to think about it. What a design. And you wonder how a scientist, looking at this universe in its amazing complexity and diversity and beauty and functionality, could fail to be a believer. But something else, beyond the fact that creation demands a creator, that design demands a designer, there's an ethical argument here. Sometimes people will say, how can you believe in God and believe in evil? My response is, how can you believe in evil and not believe in God? Now, what I mean by that is this: without the presence of God, there is no standard by which we can determine what is good and what is evil. Now, granted, God could have created a world without evil, and He chose not to do it. In the last analysis, God gains glory by the creation that He has made, because He illustrates that only He can bring good out of evil and gains glory from that. But apart from that, if there is no God, there really is no evil. When you think of Hitler and his deeds of killing the Jews, for instance, how can we sit in judgment upon Hitler and say what he did is wrong? From his perspective, it is right. And you see, without God, right and wrong become relative terms. To him, ridding Germany of the Jews was a good thing, an ethical thing, and a moral thing. Now, his mind was twisted. Yes, we can say that. But we say it because we are operating from a concept of a standard of right that says that human life is sacred, something to be preserved, that people have a right to it. How do we know that? How do we know that? Why was it wrong for the radical Muslims of Al-Qaeda to destroy the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001? Why was that wrong? From their viewpoint, it was perfectly right. It was carrying out the will of Allah. How do we know these things? What gives us the right to say something is ethically good or ethically evil? Because without God, cultural norms become relative to a society. How can we say to the Mayans that offering the heart of a virgin while it's still beating is wrong? They thought it was right. You see, it is God who determines what is ultimately and finally right, and without a God, there is no way to determine right and wrong. Man cannot set an absolute standard. That's something the Greek philosopher Plato realized. It was beyond man to set an absolute standard, and he said right and wrong must come from God. But let's go one step further. Without God, there is no purpose and there is no meaning to life. What is the point of it all?
Why don't we just take a gun and shoot ourselves and end it all now? This life is senseless because there can be no real purpose without a God to determine what that purpose is. Again, it's simply what I think and what you think, and we have all these different cross currents that contradict each other of ideas of what is the purpose of life. But when we come down to it, we're here a few days and then we die. Is there any real point to it all? We get old, we die, we get sick, we lose everything we worked for. What's the point? Every person seeks a purpose in his life. And with a God, there is a purpose. It's to glorify God. It's to enjoy God. It's to carry out His purposes. God gives life purpose. This is not just a cosmic accident. And especially is that a valuable thought in view of tragedy, in view of the death of a child or being in poverty or great suffering, because otherwise we're going to say, what's the meaning in this? The meaning is that God is in control. He has a purpose. He's working it out. I may have to go through the valley of the shadow of death, but God is with me. And finally, the ultimate reason to believe in God, which we call the transcendental reason. And that is, how can we know anything for sure? How can I know that this life is not an illusion, it's not a dream? How can I make any statement with certainty? There has to be a fixed reference point, and that point cannot come from within me. Then it becomes subjective and it's not fixed. It can't come from within a culture because that is changeable. What is fixed but God? The nature of man is to accept the idea of knowledge and to speak with certainty and to make moral judgments and to seek for meaning. And yet, if there is no God, none of these values can be established with certainty. Why did man evolve, if he evolved with these concerns and capabilities, if there exists no basis for them? From where did they come? There is no reality or certainty of reality without God. Paul stated it very well in Acts chapter 17. He said, "In Him we live and move and have our being." If God is not the answer, then what is the source? What is the basis? What is the reason for life, for motion, for being, for knowledge, for purpose, for anything? Think about these things. God bless you. Join us again for our next study.
Thank you, David. We look forward to hearing the remaining 8 lessons in this series. It is so relevant in our time where we are constantly being called upon to defend our faith. If you would like a cassette tape of today's broadcast, you may receive that by calling the ministry office at 1-877-936-9334. Again, that toll-free number is 1-877-936-9334. Or you may write to the ministry office at Engedi Ministries, E-N-G-E-D-I Ministries, 165 Blair Road, Laverne, Tennessee 37086. You may also learn more about the various aspects of our ministry by visiting our website at engedi.org. There you will find descriptions of many Bible study series designed to help you in your own personal study of God's Word. Until next week, may God bless you and keep you.